Hi, welcome to today's lecture. We're going to change things up just a little bit in that so far in the course, we have focused a lot on cash flows coming into the organization. That's the exciting part, right? Making money for the organization. We're going to change things up a little bit in this lecture, and we're going to be focusing on cash flows going out of the organization. And how might that be applicable in the real world? Well, let's say, for example, you are looking at maybe two different um, software systems or two different services. It could be a piece of equipment that you might need for your organization, your hospital, your department. That's essential for the running of the program, but doesn't yield directly in a cash inflow. So it's costing you actually money to do such a thing. And how do you look at that from a project standpoint? How do you look at what, if you're choosing between two, which one makes the most sense? So in today's lecture, we're really going to be looking at adjusting the cost of those cash outflows and also any kind of risk adjustments we might need to make to those. Because in the real world, most of you, well, maybe it might be about 50-50, but some of you are going to be working for profit centers and some of you are going to be working for cost centers. What does that mean? Well, there are some areas that are revenue producing areas. Um, and those are the profit centers of an organization. But yet there's the supporting areas that are necessary for the organization to do what it does, but don't necessarily have a direct cash inflow. So, and there's quite a lot of them. I mean, they're all over the hospital. And there's always that debate whether radiology is a cost center or a profit center. Sometimes you can have a department and within a hospital system that may be clearly a money loser, that may be clearly a cost center. Um, and it's still vital for the organization because it will bring in a patient or a customer that may need the services of that particular area, but they also need all the other stuff. And that's where the extra revenue comes in. So sometimes you can't even look at these in isolation. But um, ultimately, you as a manager are going to be faced with whether you're looking for working at a cost center or profit center, you're going to be buying stuff. You're going to be analyzing projects that will not have cash inflows, that will have cash outflows. So we're going to be looking at that, how to compare those two projects, and how to risk adjust those projects based on some certain assumptions. So the best way we like to do that is through an example. I will be following the example in the book if you want to follow along in the textbook. Hopefully you've already read the textbook on that, but I think the example in there is pretty good. So we're going to go to the Magic Blackboard and we're going to work through that problem. And I think you'll find that it's actually not very difficult at all. Same thing we've been doing, just with some sign changes. All right, well, let's get started and go to the Magic Blackboard. And as always, I hope you are following along with me with pencil and paper in hand, and perhaps I'm going to recommend that you have get ready to go to a website. So we're going to do a website here. So as you're watching this, you may want to open your browser to another window and kind of try to follow along. Of course, you can always pause and then play around with this, and then go ahead and hit play as we kind of work back and forth between two computer screens. But we're going to be following that example right out of the book. I think it's a pretty good one, and it's involving again basically two choices. You got two things. It could be five things, it could be nine things, but let's just keep it simple. We've got two choices that we're faced with, and for the particular example, we've got Greenbrier Oncology Associates, and they've got a trash problem. They've got a waste disposal problem, biological waste, whatever's being produced. If you work in healthcare, there's a lot of this stuff that's generated. Dirty gloves, sharps, biological tissue samples. You just can't put them in landfills. So it does take a little bit of specialized care. So in this case, they're looking at two different solutions to their trash problem. One is to keep it in-house with their own processing, whatever they're doing. Maybe they're burning it. I have no idea. and they're looking at outside contract or basically outsourcing those services. Again, this could be anything between two choices that are involving cash outflows. Okay, it's something that's going to cost you money. All right, so this is a very powerful method. I think it's a great way for you as a manager to be able to make decisions on these types of projects. It could be services, it could be hardware, it could be anything. So, but I think you'll get the gist of that as we're going through. So with the problem here, we do have outlined the parameters of the problem. So let me turn my pen on real quickly here if I can. And all right, here we go. All right, so we've got the 5 years of this time frame that we're looking at. This is year zero. This is that initial upfront cost, or and maybe the term initial investment might be used. Okay, so think about that. Year zero, kind of that upfront. Then you have the subsequent, fees, or maintenances or expenses, whatever is involved in this case. In this case, it's probably the annual contractual fees that you see for the outside contract, and then you've got, if you do it in-house, you've got your expenses to maintain that all the way through year 5. Some other things, we're going to bring back our friend, the corporate cost of capital, which we have right down here. So that's important. Remember how we use that. We're going to be using that to discount these cash flows. Now, I am going to introduce one kind of new concept. All this other stuff, this will be relatively easy, and we'll have this done in just a few minutes. But this new one I'm going to introduce is this differential risk adjustment. So think of it like this. We have our corporate cost of capital. Do you remember what that is? That's right. It's that kind of that debt and that equity. How much is it costing you to get the stuff that you want to do? And traditionally we were speaking of long-term debt and equity, but really depending on the organization and the firm, if you're working for a small practice, it could be other sources of debt that aren't considered long-term debt. But I guess with the classic example, it's the long-term debt and the equity. All right, so there's that. The corporate cost of capital, which we've gotten figured out for us at 10%. Again, that's a great way to start with a discount rate. But now we're going to have this differential risk adjustment, okay? And what that's going to allow us to do, based on maybe some subjective information, okay, or it might be very objective information, but we're going to adjust the projects based on what we believe the risk profile for the project comes in. There is the art, and you probably have noticed that through the class. Some of these things that we do are really judgment calls, on what we believe about interest rates in the future, what we believe may be a good risk differential to apply. So sometimes the math helps us, but where we get paid the big bucks is hopefully by using those more uh, fuzzy zones and applying principles to that. So we're going to have this differential risk adjustment, which will allow us to change from that standard profile of risk that's facing the organization. Either make it, hey, this is a lot more risky than we normally do, or hey, this is much more conservative than we normally do, and we're going to be able to apply a risk adjustment, a differential to that risk adjustment, which we will apply to that corporate cost of capital. We're going to adjust that corporate cost of capital. In this case, we're given the differential risk adjustment rate. So, but it could easily, it, it could it could be anywhere as far as what is that? Is that number always 4%? No, I would say a nice range for that is probably around 2 to 4%. This one seems to be pretty aggressive in its adjustment capabilities, but um, I would, or maybe split the difference. If you ever are faced with a situation, I don't know what to do. Well, pick 3%. That would be pretty good. So I think. All right, so we've got that. But you're not required to calculate at this point what to figure out what the differential risk adjustment is that would be facing the organization. That'll be something that'll be given to you in a problem or example or essay or question or whatever. So, but what do we simply do? We're just going to have we're going to adjust our cost of capital. I think you can do the math here. We're going to have either a we're going to either be doing the 10%. We're also going to have a 14, if I can get my pen to work here. Here we go. We're going to have a 14%, or we're going to have a 6%. And we're going to see how those behave. And the question I want you to think about is, if one of these two projects you deemed, for whatever reasons, you found information or whatever you found, kind of in that sort of in that subjective zone that you felt it was more risky, which one of these would you apply if you felt the project was more risky? Don't worry, and we're going to work through that. So don't worry, you're going to know. But let's first find out right now without doing a differential risk adjustment. Okay, let's just the same. Everything's cool and we're good with the 10%. Let's find out which project we should do. And how are we going to do that? Well, the key is present value of costs. Net present value. That's all we're doing. Net present value. It's as simple as that. So we're going to bring in our calculator right down here, which we used before in previous lectures. Bring in our net present value calculator. So let's bring that in and let's run some of the numbers here. So we just happen that's the default on this calculator is 5 years. Remember, you can add years, which is great. I love this little calculator. So let's do the in-house system. Now, one trick to remember with this particular calculator, the way it works, is it says initial investment, okay? Because it is doing a net present value in kind of the normal mode where you have an investment and then you get positive cash flows in. So it's already assuming a negative cash flow out. So be careful about your signs. If you goof it up, don't worry, it's not gonna work for you. The website won't work. But just start off with a positive in this number because it already knows it's a negative. Does that make I hope that makes sense, or I've completely confused you. But it's already going with the assumption on this calculator that is an investment, so it already is calculating it behind the scenes as a cash outflow. So no sign changes are really necessary here. All right, so if we go back with the in-house system, it was $500,000 up front. Don't know, maybe they had to buy burners or something to burn all their samples or whatnot. Discount rate, you guys know what that is, right? That's your corporate cost of capital. Cash flows. Now this one this is what's great about this calculator. This is where you can have some fun with it, with both negative and positives and different dollar amounts and all kinds of cool stuff. So in year one, year 1 through 5 is pretty easy. It's all the same. So it's a negative 75,000. And just to be on the quick side, I'm just going to copy that and drop that in each one here. Boom, boom, and there you go. All right, so it's double checking. We've got our initial investment, we've got our corporate cost of capital, and we've got our cash flows. Again, I didn't put the sign in there as a negative because it already knows it's an investment, which is an outflow. So the website already assumes an outflow. Let's hit calculate, see what we get. All right, great. So we get a net present value, and that's something that you'll want to write down there, of $784,000 on $309. Okay. All right. So that's for the in-house system. Okay. Now let's do the other system, the outsourcing, which sounds super attractive because Hey, it's only the upfront cost in year zero. That investment is only 25,000, right? Sounds great. But we're paying these guys 200,000 every year. Hmm. Let's see what the math says on this. All right, so we're going to plug in our 200,000. Again, these could be actually uneven cash flows too. All right, so that's kind of, but in this case, nice and easy. We're going to just use even cash flows, double checking everything. All right, and let's hit calculate and see what we get. And in this case, we get $783,157. So in this case, we have our in-house system that's going to cost us, and I'll round to make it simple. It's going to cost us 784,000, or we can do the outside contract at 783,000. Well, I guess we sign that contract, don't we? It has the lower net present value. We're spending less money in a present value mode, which you want to make your decisions in a present value mode. Thinking about what is it costing me in today's dollars. So yeah, so this time we actually would sign the contract for the outsourcing. So that looks good. All right, so there we go. We've answered our question. We've made a decision. We've told our boss, hey, boss, sign the contract because we're actually saving about $1,000. Okay, great. So you sign the contract. That looks good. Now let's go back to the where we talked about maybe what would happen if, for some reason, you deemed the outside contracts, these outside contracts, you deemed them more risky. And you've got this risk differential. So you know that you're going to be doing this guy, the 14% or the 6. Which one do you use? Well, let's try the 14 and see what we get. Remember, we've now made it more risky. So we're gonna some intuition is going to help here, and then after we're done, we'll talk about the relationship. So let's bring in our calculator, bring it back. All right, so this is easy. All we need to do now, we've left all the information in there. We just got to change the discount rate. So what looked like an incredibly hard problem that would take you hours to do really would take you 5 minutes to do. so it's so hopefully you're watching these videos, because some of you, when you were doing your problems, were doing it the longhand method, and I feel so bad for you, because please do it the shorthand method. But there we go. All right, so let's plug in the 16% and see what we get. And let's hit calculate. Whoops, there's the calculate button. All right. Huh. Write that down, and I'm just going to average or keep it simple, but $679,858. Okay. And that is with the 14% risk adjusted rate, because we believe that for some reason we deemed the contract more risky. Maybe it probably, what happens if that, what would make it more risky? Let's say, what if they went out of business? We've had that happen. What if you sign a contract with somebody, and in year 3 they go out of business? Then you got to reboot, do everything all over again. You could deem it more risky, more risky to going out with an outside contractor. So it could be anything, anything that for some reason. But in this case, when we use the 16% risk adjusted rate. Again, going back, whoops, sorry, I was supposed to use 14, guys. Let me go back to 14, my mistake. Same, this will be quick though, right? Let's calculate. Okay, so we're at a negative 711K. Okay. Let's go and risk adjust that the other way. Make sure I got my numbers correct. Okay, now I want to use the 6%. Let's see what happens. Put in the 6, hit calculate. Oh, look at that. All right, so with the 6%, I get 867,000 loss or expense, net present value expense, cash outflow, if you will. So here is the situation. Here is, I guess, the summary of this point. When we use the 14%, okay, when we use the 14, we got a negative 711K, 170 or $711,000. When we use the 6%, I know this is incredibly sloppy, but we got 867K. Now, let me ask you, if a project was more risky, just intuitively think about it, if it was more risky, should the net present value of that project go up or down? Right? It should go down. It's more risky. It's chances of bad things happening. This is bad things happening. So there is the trick about this whole thing. When you're using that differential risk adjustment, when a project's risk goes up, this is one of those things where you have these inverse relationships. Your discounting rate that you're going to want to use from your baseline or whatever you want to call it. In this case, our baseline is that corporate cost of capital. But when we're risk adjusting for something more risky, we want to use the lower interest rate. We want to back that interest rate down, which makes the project less attractive. We want to make it less attractive because there's more risk involved. In this case, less attractive means not making any money, but not spending as much money as possible. So again, it's one of these, where I do my thumb up and my thumb down. It's one of these opposite relationships. Let's say but if you did the problem and you did the 14%, and you got that, wonderful number in there, and you're like, oh, this is even better than before. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't. It should get worse than before. It should get worse than when we were using the baseline corporate cost of capital. All right, so now think about what you now know how to do. I mean, this is a pretty, I know I say every skill that you learn here is pretty cool, but this is actually real world things that you can do with helping you make a decision for something that's, pretty real, again, real world where you're looking at cash outflows. Again, you could apply this to cash inflows in a switch, which we pretty much have done all throughout this course, especially since time value of money in modules 1 and 2. So, but a little bit different twist and with the risk adjustment. That's where you can, hey, I'm going to impress my boss because I'm actually going to maybe throw a little bit of risk adjustment on a particular project that maybe we deem as more risky. And that's why you make the big bucks because you're the one that deems it more risky. And what's your rationale by saying it's more risky? And it can go the other way too, right? It could go, well, this is deemed less risky. But usually you want to, in general, with accounting and business decisions, the principle of conservatism had nothing to do with political conservatism, but just choosing, doing the thing that is the less inflated or the more, I guess, the more conservative, the more route. So again, that usually keeps you out of hot water. It's when you start choosing, oh, this project isn't risky, and then you kind of tossing the dice a little bit more. That's when you're kind of straying outside those principles of kind of conservative policy making. So whenever, if in doubt, you always lean towards the conservative option. In this case, the conservative option is which one would cost my company the most money. If it has the potential of costing my company the most money, I want to fully disclose that this has the potential of costing my company more money and not try to fluff it up and say, oh, it's going to be the greatest thing in the world. And I wish we would apply this to more decision making because sometimes what I think happens in the real, well, I know this happens in the real world. I see it all the time. Is people without you have financial savvy now. Okay, we in this module, you guys have more financial savvy than 90% of the population. What and even within business, experienced business people, what they'll do, they'll focus on this right there. They'll focus on year one. They'll say, "Oh yeah, we're saving X amount." Um, Guys, have you looked at long term? You know, and yeah, maybe they might promise you some lower rates in the first couple of years, and then are they going to jack it up, right? It's the old cable company principle, right? Cable company promises you great rates, they stick for a year, and then they jump up, right? So it's kind of that too. So there's not a lot of thinking in this zone, in that beyond the first 1 or 2 years. There's not a lot of thinking. Plus, there's not a lot of thinking about transition. Because if you do make a bad decision and you have to transition out of it, there's a ton of money involved in that transition or whatever you're doing. If you were getting outside of the outside contract, bringing that back in house, there would be a lot of additional costs that will be incurred by doing that. So, all right. Well, that concludes this lecture on the present value of cost outflows and how to risk adjust them. Hopefully, you found this as another skill you can add to your overflowing toolkit of financial acumen.